Welcome to the February meeting of the Board of Water Resources. Thank you for coming. First item of business we need to do is excuse two of our board members. Randy Closure is snowed in North Dakota, and Juliette Tennant has got the flu. So on both ends. I mean, on both. Wait, we got one person snowed in, enjoying the snow in North Dakota, and the other person is suffering here in Salt Lake with the rest of us. First item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. We have a motion to approve the minutes as...
Mr. Chairman, I'd make a motion we approve the minutes.
We have a motion by Mr. Lemon. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Norm Johnson seconds it. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Now it's time to elect new board officers for this year. I've enjoyed serving as chairman, and I want to thank the board members and the staff for the support and help to make it look successful. So thank you. With that, we'll entertain a motion to select a board chair and a vice chair.
Mr. Chairman, I'd make a motion we elect Charles Holmgren to be chairman, and Norm, can we do it one motion?
Yeah, let's
and
do it all
Norm
in one
Johnson
motion.
to be vice chairman.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Ibsen to put Charles Holmgren as chairman and Norm Johnson as vice chairman. Do we have a second to that motion?
I'll second it.
We have a motion by, second by Jim Lemon. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So it's in your hands, Charles. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, big shoes to fill here, obviously, but Steve's been a good example to follow. So anyway, our next agenda item is our water supply report, and Troy Broston from NRCS. Are you ready to razzle-dazzle us with the bad news?
All right. Thanks for having me. So, in Utah, nobody is snowed in. If they say they're snowed in, they're lying. Okay, let me see. All right, so January, we all know snowpack hasn't been doing that well this year, and January was not kind to us either. This is a map of the Northwest with overlaid basin maps, and you can see, if you can just visualize a high pressure system sitting up just to the west of Utah, that high pressure system has pushed all the weather up north, and Montana and Wyoming have done quite well, but the rest of us have suffered due to that high pressure system. Currently, our statewide snow water equivalent maps, that's the amount of water that's in the snowpack. As you can see from this maps, the one on the left-hand side is actually January 1, and the map on the right-hand side is February 1. So there was not much room of improvement there going on at all. We've had, since in January 1, 2 decent storms. From those 2 storms, it helped maintain the snowpack up north, and it did improve the south conditions a little bit from below abysmal to just abysmal. Beaver was at 7%, now it's more like around 32%. So we've seen some improvement down south, but the south is still very low. For the most part, we see the Bear and the North Slope of Uintas are around 8%, and the rest of the state is hovering around 50% or less. When we go into it, Bear River is sitting at about 78% right now, and it stands about 20% chance of reaching a normal snowpack by April 1. Now, we break into the sub-basins. The Upper Bear itself is at 86%, so the upper level of the Upper Bear is doing better overall for the Bear River Basin, where the lower Bear is only at 61%. When you look at that graph, that projection graph, you see the little red line indicates the 10% or the 90% that will reach that. The green line there is the 50% chance that we'll obtain that level. And then a blue one is the 10% chance that we can reach that level by April 1. And the solid, smooth green line there is your third-year normal snowpack for the lower Bear. So as it stands, you can see even at 10%, there's probably a little less than 10% chance of reaching normal for the lower Bear. Now we look at the upper green. Upper green is doing quite well at 102% of normal. And a large part that is due to the number of snowtells that's included in this estimation, where a lot of them are up north there in Wyoming, and that's where a lot of the snow is. We're getting good snow up there from the storms coming in, but they're just not reaching down into Utah. So a large part of that basin doing well is due to those Wyoming sites. Now the Black Fork Junction, or Black Fork River area, which is just basically a north slope of the Uintas there, is at about 81%. And that stands, again, about 20% chance of reaching normal by April 1. Ashwood Brush Creek, so that's above the Vernal, and that's the east side of the Uintas. That's doing much worse at closer to 53% of normal, and that stands less than 10% chance of reaching the normal snowpack. So as we go into the rest of these basins, you're going to see averaging 55% and lower, and we're basically looking at a less than 10% chance of reaching a normal snowpack for the rest of these basins. So Weeder Basin is sitting at 55%. The Tooele Valley is at 47%. Provo Jordan is at 50%. And Duchesne River is 55%. Lower Sevier is at 48%. And now we start doing worse. We're going in at 36% for Upper Sevier. Beaver River's at 31. Then we're looking at Sandpitch River is at 40%. 36% for Price San Rafael River Basin. Dirty Devil's at 48%. Southeastern is at 37%. Escalante is at 32%. And the Southwest is at 32%. So that basically sums up our snowpack. We're doing really poor as far as accumulating snowpack this year. January 1, we had some basins that were record low. When you look back at the snowpack records that we have that goes back to 1920s, we saw some improvement even from just 2 storms in January, which brought it up from the worst snowpack to the second or third snowpack. It'll be interesting to see what happens for this month of February. The outward projection for the next 2 or 3 weeks is not good, so I anticipate that by March 1, we may be again in breaking the record for the snowpack on record, being the worst snowpack on record. So I want to talk a little bit about soil moistures. Our soil moistures up north are actually within average, above average, or close to average. These soil moistures are only go back 17 years. The soil moistures are based on a weighted average between a 2, 8, and 20-inch soil moisture sensor. So most of the soil moisture percentage from these graphs is derived from a 40-inch, most of the 20-inch sensor. So you're really looking at soil moisture down to 20 inches in the mountains. Up as we work our way down south, we start seeing soil moisture dropping a little bit in Provo and Weber. Provo is below average, and Weber's right along close to average of soil moistures. So as we go further south in the lower Sevier and the San Rafael's, you see the soil moistures dropping there. And then the Upper Sevier and Dirty Devil. Dirty Devil's in record-breaking dry soils. Now, why this is important is because with the drier moistures, drier soils, that will make the runoff more inefficient. So a lot of the water, as it melts out, will be absorbed by soils on site until they get fully saturated, and then you'll start seeing runoff into the rivers and then into the reservoirs. Southwest and Escalante, they are both close to record-breaking dry soils down there too. So on average, for the state, soil moisture is below average. So this is another nail in the coffin, sort of say, where we can expect an inefficient runoff as well as a below average runoff for this water year. So, let's sum it up. The Bear River and the Uintas, the North Slope Uintas, those are our two decent basins. They're doing okay. They're at 81%. You know, they stand about still currently at 20% chance of reach a normal snowpack. When we work our way down south, the Weber, Duchesne, Provo, Lower Sevier, they range in between 50 to 55% of normal. For rest of the basins down south, we're looking at 29 to 45% of normal. So pretty much all these basins, aside from the Bear River and the Uintas, have a 10% chance or less of reaching a normal snowpack by April 1. Our forecast on February 1 up north within the Bear and the North Slope, the forecasted flows are estimated between 55 to 85% of normal. Then we look at the mid-north, which includes the Weber and Duchesne, Provo. Those ranging typically from 50 to 70%. And the south is ranging pretty much from 30 to 50%. Now that said, there are some, that's the general range in the south, but there are actually some forecast points that are as low as 6%, and there are some that are ranging, 60 to 70%. But on a whole, across the state of Utah, the forecast for the river flow forecasts, they're all well below normal or average stream flows. So in addition to dry soils, most of our low elevation, all of our low elevation sites are dry. Mid elevation sites are ripe and starting to melt out. Currently, the high elevation snowpack is holding, but again, with the low elevation and mid elevation starting to melt out, that's another indicator that we will have a low flow and inefficient runoff for come the springtime. And the only bright side we see right now is the reservoirs. The ones we report on as a whole is at 73%. The BOR, their reservoirs that they maintain, they're at about 80%. And a lot of them are really very close to full. So we had a really good carryover from the last water year, good winter last year. And so that will help this horrible, really bad snow season this year, and that will get us through the summer. But then we're really going to need to have a good snowpack next year to make up for the water that we use this year. So one would ask, where's the snow? It's not here in Utah. It's mainly up in Montana and Wyoming and north of us. That's all I got. I'm sorry I can't bring better news. It's very depressing.
Any questions for Mr. Broston from the board? You have, are you getting any reports from National Weather Service on projected weather patterns, or is that a hopeless discussion point as well?
I just came back from, we had a meeting earlier this morning at the Weather Service building, and Brian McNary, they projected out 1 week, 2 week, 3 weeks. They say even 3 weeks out, there's no change in the pattern. And so the month of February looks like, even before it gets started, it looks like it's shot as far as getting accumulating snow or getting good storms coming in. We did have a few years ago where we had a bad snowpack, and then we had a really wet spring, and that timing of that rain really did actually improve the runoff. So we can hope for that, maybe.
Yes.
Troy, are there places in the state where the reservoir storage isn't so good?
Oh yeah, there's down south didn't do as well last year. They started out really well, and then their snowpack came off early. So Sevier Bridge is at about 20% full. Mill site is equally like 10%, And I believe Steinecker is a low too, because they had to do some building there, and so they had to drain the reservoir last year. Most of the northern reservoirs are doing quite well, but there are some reservoirs of concern, and the south is not doing great by any means. But so that's where that's at. Yeah.
Okay, Troy, thank you for your report. We'll be looking forward to your next month's report, and
Yeah.
hope something gets better along the way.
Yes, me too. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to change the order on the agenda a little bit, and I believe Todd Adams is going to introduce a gentleman from Bowen and Collins that's going to give us a report.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you all know, back in 2015, there was an audit of the water use data collection process at the state and at the division. We went through a couple of years. We had the auditor come back. He's done a third-party or a follow-up audit, as well as during that time, Senate Bill 251 provided some WIRA funding, and out of that funding, $1 million was to look at third-party review of the data collection process, as well as some other things, water conservation goals, and some financial economic look. Well, we put an RFP out there. We've got a third-party review. It happened over the last more than several months. And Bowen and Collins and Hansenau and Luce got together, and they've got a report, and we'll give that to you today and let you hear what they had to say about the work that we have done, where we need to go, the methodologies going forward, and that point. So,
thank you. Gentlemen, one of you is Keith Larson, and
Yes, that's me, Keith Larson.
Okay. All right, Keith.
And I'll introduce the team here.
Okay, very good.
And hopefully, do I need to pull up the PowerPoint, or is that being done elsewhere? Hopefully we'll get that up here. My name's Keith Larson. I'm with Bowen Collins and Associates, and with me today is Rob Sobey and Steve Jones from Hansenau and Luce. I'll do most of the talking, but I brought them to answer all the hard questions, so that's their designated job today. And about a week ago, we went up and presented this information to the Natural Resources Committee at the legislature. And so this is our second run through. Probably won't need to go into as much detail with you gentlemen. You have a little more background in the water side of things, but we hope to provide some good information for you. Now, okay, so just to really quickly talk about what we were asked to do. We were asked to look at your methodology of collecting water use data, and then to look at the overall accuracy of the historic numbers. We looked at 2005, 2010, and 2015 numbers that were assembled by the Division of Water Resources. After looking at that information, we were asked also to make some recommendations regarding future improvements. Just got to figure out how this works here. In terms of how we attack this task is we did a couple of different things. First of all, we spent quite a bit of time doing interviews with the Division of Water Resources staff and also the Division of Water Rights staff. We also got out and did some interviews with some of the water providers that are turning in data for this data collection process. Once we had that, we looked at your water use database and all available documentation. Last, we went out and we did a detailed survey of some different entities. And what we wanted to do, we wanted to capture both a broad range, as much as we could of use, but then also get in deep in a couple of areas. So to do that, we looked at 3 large water districts, Jordan Valley, Weber Basin, and Metropolitan Water District of Salt Lake and Sandy. Those 3 districts comprise about 50% of the water use in the state. So by looking at those 3, we're able to get a pretty broad indication of accuracy. But then we also wanted to look at some smaller retail water providers and really get into the nitty-gritty of how the data was being collected. One of the questions that has come up is, why should we believe your numbers, Bowen, Collins, Hanson, Luce, any more than the Division of Water Resources? And I think the answer to that is twofold. Number one, we had the luxury that Water Resources doesn't necessarily have of being able to go in and get the actual raw data. We went to each of these cities and these districts and looked for not the data that was being turned in, but the raw data. That allowed us to look for trends, look for inconsistencies that probably wouldn't be available to Water Resources staff. And then number two, most of the entities we worked with, we've been working with on water supply studies for a number of years, and so we're familiar with the details of that. So with that in mind, what did we find? And hopefully we have a little bit of good news here, maybe a little more than Troy was able to bring you. First of all, potable water use data is quite accurate, and it is getting better. And that is where we spend a lot of our time. That's where Water Resources spends a lot of their time. And what we found is they've done a really good job at getting that information and getting accurate numbers. And we'll look at that in just a little more detail. But in a nutshell, the other things that we found, secondary water use and water supply data, that's less accurate, and there are some reasons for that that we'll talk about real quickly and some things that we can do to improve that. We also found that system loss needs to be considered when you're calculating your water demands, and then we're also recommending that you focus on the large systems to provide the best bang for your buck or return on your investment as you seek to understand water use patterns. So let's just look at these real quick. I'll spend a little time on this slide. Again, we looked at some individual water systems and some large water districts. And what we're showing here is what the observed error was, or observed difference between the numbers that we found and the numbers that have been reported by Water Resources in their planning documents. So I've published 2 different kinds of error here. The first is absolute error. Basically, we add up all the water use for the systems we sampled, we divide it by the amount that Water Resources had, and we get a total number of difference. Now, there's some that are high, some that are low, and those offset each other a little bit, but in the end, the absolute error is just the difference at the end of the day. The mean weighted error represents, if we looked at any one specific system, how much difference would we expect for that single system? And so that could be higher, that could be low. That's why that's represented with a plus or minus. And in short, what we're seeing is you look at absolute error at 0.3% on individual water systems and 0.8% on the larger water districts. That's a pretty incredible number in terms of accuracy with all the variables that are out there and that Water Resources is faced with. To get to that number is pretty remarkable. Doing a great job in terms of potable water use data. You can see that it's also improved over time. From 2005 to 2015, we've generally seen a reduction, so those are getting better over time. We identified in our report 17 different things that could be improved in the methodology from 2015, the 2015 process. And as we looked at that and started talking about what's happened in the last 2 years since the audit, out of those 17, 7 have been completed already, 7 are in process, and there were only 3 remaining recommendations that still needed to be started. So already since 2015, staff has started to make a number of improvements. This slide, I think, is really illustrative of the effect of that. Basically, what you see is a lot more systems reporting. Only 2 systems that we were able to identify had not reported in 2016. And so really the process, even from 2015, is getting better and better. Okay, so on the secondary side, what we found is that we were not quite as accurate on that side. And in general, what we're seeing is an underestimation of what our numbers were showing in terms of secondary water use. There's a couple of reasons that we observed that we think are contributing to this. One is sort of an oversimplification of lot size. In the 2015 draft, basically secondary was created by multiplying an estimated lot size by an application rate and an estimated application rate. Lot size, what we're seeing is that it was oversimplified, that we weren't getting accurate data necessarily relative to lot size. Then we also noticed that there appears to be an underestimation of application rates. This figure shows that we have 3 numbers shown here. There's an evapotranspiration rate. That's the minimum amount of water needed to support turf in these different areas. There's an application rate for metered systems that is more than that. That represents inefficiencies. And then there's also an application rate for unmetered systems that is significantly higher than that. Because most of the state's systems are unmetered, the overall application rate is higher to the blue bar shown in the chart, whereas the assumed application rate was closer to that tan yellow bar in the middle. And so that is probably the primary source of underestimation in the state numbers. We also looked at water supply, and this represents the amount of water planned for each of the entities. We also found that that was a little bit underestimated, and we contribute that mainly to the fact that Division of Water Resources doesn't have a lot of the detailed data regarding water rights and contracts and things that go into evaluating water supply. So overall accuracy and summary, potable water use numbers look great. Secondary and supply are a little bit underestimated. One of the other conclusions that we made was that system loss is something that has not historically been represented and needs to be represented. I think you are all familiar. You have a supply that goes to a house, and thus far our focus has been on metered use. And what we're finding is that metered use only represents about 85% of the total water consumption on average. And that's a average number. Some systems can be much higher than that. We found systems up in the 30 plus number, but that represents leaks, unmetered use from things like fighting fires, construction water, application to public properties sometimes are unmetered. So there's a difference, and that needs to be included. The last big conclusion we had was that there is definitely a difference between large and small systems in terms of your overall numbers. Large systems, and in this case we've defined that as systems serving more than 5,000 people. You have 18% of your systems, just under 100 of the 500 systems in the state. Those result in 88% of the water use. The other 82% of the systems, the small systems scattered throughout the state, only result or are only responsible for about 12% of the water use. And so as a result, if you want to focus on getting your numbers as accurate as possible, you need to make sure that those large systems are giving you good numbers, And the small systems, if there's a little bit of error in those, that's not going to have as big effect on the total number. Okay, so to wrap up, what are our recommendations? Number one, continue your current trajectory of improvement in data collection. As mentioned, we've seen major steps forward since the 2015 audit. If you continue that direction, we think you're absolutely on the right path. We'd recommend you add consideration of system losses into the calculation of demands. In the short term, we're recommending adding 15% to your current estimates. In the long term, we're recommending, and we recommended this to the legislature, that you require AWWA M36 water audits in the future so that systems have a little better idea of what their actual system loss is. We're also recommending that you improve your secondary estimates, and that will consist in 2015. We think you can use infrared imagery, and in fact, Water Resources already started to do this to get irrigated acreage, and then update your application rates based on the numbers we've provided in the report. In the long term, and this was really a big thing that the legislature wanted to talk about, was requiring secondary metering, at least for your larger systems, so that we have both better numbers and we also have some ability to encourage conservation. And then the final recommendations for supply, we're recommending that you have your systems do a detailed supply analysis to provide to Water Resources so they can improve those numbers. And then focus your efforts on the large systems, especially those larger than 5,000 persons. Last thing is we were asked to provide a recommendation regarding what baseline number we would use for future planning, and we're recommending the 2015 estimates of Water Resources with the few updates that we've identified here. And then this was for legislative actions. We did make these recommendations to the legislature. Secondary metering, AWWA water audits, and supply evaluation plans, especially for those larger customers. So with that, we'll open up to any questions.
I have one. Could you go back and maybe do a little bit more detail of what is required in AWWA M36 audit?
Sure. Either you want to take this one? I've been talking a lot. I'm
Dr. Rob Sobey of Hanson, Allen and Luce, by the way. AWWA has come up with a standard method for auditing water loss in systems. It includes calculation errors, thefts, parent losses, fire flows that are unmetered construction, etc. And that's a standard method that can be applied to any size water system. And many Utah water systems are already doing this. I know that Central Utah Water Conservancy District is already implementing this kind of audit, and that's something that we would recommend as a standard practice for, especially for large systems.
Okay, thank you.
Essentially, you're just stepping through all of your different potential water uses, whether metered or unmetered, through a defined methodology to identify loss.
Additional questions from the board? I have one, Keith. On your infrared work, is that satellite imagery, or are you doing something more direct than that?
Yeah, take this one.
I'll speak to that as well. The Utah AGRC, the Automated Geographic Reference Center, has been contracting to collect regular high-resolution imagery data that includes color and infrared bands. And there are certain algorithms that can be used with those 4 bands to identify and delineate vegetated areas and to also detect the degree of vegetation there. That, combined with estimates of secondary water use, can provide a more accurate estimation of secondary water use on the end user side rather than just production.
Thank you. Any other questions?
No question, just a comment. We appreciate the good work that Bowen Collins, Hanson, Allen Luce has done for us on this. And just as note for the board, we'll be taking the recommendations that they have made and finish fixing up our 2015 data, especially on the secondary use with the infrared and trying to come up with a better estimate of the secondary use, and then we'll do the same with the 2016, 2017 numbers. So, thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, gentlemen from Bowman and Collins and Hanson, Allen and Luce. Our next agenda item are special item reports, and our first one is Davis and Weber Canal Companies for authorization and committal of funds. And Tom Cox is here for the division. We have Mr. Scott Paxman, Mr. Rick Smith, and Mr. Bryce
Wilcox.
Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
We'll let Tom make his presentation.
Okay, the technical difficulties are over, so the Davis and Weber Canal Company was organized in 1884. We'll get to the project slides here. And it's currently registered in good standing with the Department of Commerce. It delivers approximately 60,000 acre-feet of water annually to its service area, which covers around 40,000 acres. This 60,000 acre-feet includes wholesale water to Weber Basin Water Conservancy District, the Roy Water Conservancy Subdistrict, and Syracuse City, as well as to over 14,000 secondary irrigation connections and approximately 10,000 acres of ag land. We just had a little presentation about the importance of meters. The company has over 1,400 of its secondary irrigation connections that are currently metered, and that includes about 650 meters that have been installed in the last 2 years. And they have a requirement that all new residential development have secondary irrigation meters installed, so I think they're on track. So the water is diverted from the Weber River at the mouth of the canyon and delivered primarily through a 17.2 mile long Davis and Weber Canal. From about 1980 through 2011, the board has committed over $24 million to the applicant for canal improvements and more than $27 million for residential secondary irrigations in Clinton, Kaysville, Layton, and West Point. So construction on the Davis-Weber Canal began in 1884, with sections being concrete lined as early as the 1910s. But since 1999, around 61% of the canal has been replaced or rehabilitated. A lot of that is from the funding from Water Resources, but they have done a significant amount on their own. Sections of the canal remain unlined or have deteriorating liner, and the open canal tends to collect garbage and other trash, as well as being a potential safety hazard in the neighborhoods. The applicant plans to improve the remainder of the canal over the years as funding opportunities become available, and they do have a long-term plan that breaks out specific sections, and they've prioritized those in their further improvements. They're currently in the process of enclosing about a 950-foot section of the canal, and it's on the map here. You can see where the off-ramp from the freeway is, and it's from that point up to where the canal goes under State Road 126. And they have a Water Smart grant application that will allow them to enclose another about 3,600 feet of canal this coming fall and winter. The applicant is before the board today to request financial assistance from the board to enclose about 1,200 feet of the canal from where it goes underneath the State Road 126 up to that parking lot that you can see. The concrete liner in the section was installed in about 1920s, and there's considerable deterioration occurring in that section. So you can see where a lot of the sections have been broken out, and it's just looking south towards the State Highway 126. A little closer up, pictures of a couple of the sections of the liner has failed. So the project benefits is primarily will increase safety because it's be an enclosed canal, improve water quality because the garbage, and you can see in that picture there's tumbleweeds and everything in there that will keep those out. And it will conserve over 300 acre-feet of water annually. And it'll also reduce the operation and maintenance cost a little bit for the company. The projected project cost is $1,325,000. They are getting some money from UDOT to help pay for the crossing underneath the highway. And it's proposed that Water Resources provide that the board authorize and commit at this time 73.6% of the project cost up to $975,000, and that the project be purchased at 0% interest over approximately 20 years with annual payments of $48,800. Just an explanation about the terms. They're getting 0% interest because it's under the $1 million, so it can come from the revolving construction fund. And since it's mainly a safety issue, we're giving them an extended repayment period of 20 years. So that's just a short explanation on that. The project is ready to start any day because when they put the bid out for that original 950 acre or foot improvement that's going on now, they also bid out this section in anticipation of the project. So they're ready to go. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, that's staff's report.
Thank you, Tom. Rick, Scott, Bryce, would you like to make comment on your proposal?
Well, I think it's been explained very well. Tom's done a great job. We just appreciate the consideration of the board in this. It would really help us out in stretching our reserves for other projects. Thank you.
Okay, questions from the board?
Motion is in order, Mr. Chairman. I'm ready to make that. I've had the opportunity to meet with this group and did site review with staff on it as well. And so I would make the recommendation that the board authorize and commit 73.6% of the project cost up to $975,000, and the project be purchased at 0% interest over approximately 20 years with annual payments of $48,800.
Thank you for the motion.
I'll second it.
Steve Farrell makes a second to the motion. Any further discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed to the motion? Motion passes. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Next agenda item is L579, Santaquin City, for an authorization and committal of funds. And we have with us today Mr. Kirk Hunsaker, Mayor. Mr. Benjamin Reeves, City Manager. And Mr. Norm Bagley, City Engineer. Gentlemen, and Russell Hadley is going to make the presentation.
Okay, Chairman Holmgren, members of the board. Santaquin City out in Utah County. Santaquin City serves culinary water to about 2,950 connections and secondary lawn and garden water to about 2,800 connections. Culinary water is supplied by 4 springs and 2 wells, while secondary water is supplied by irrigation wells, surface waters from Santaquin Creek, and treated sewage effluent. All of the secondary lawn and garden connections are metered. The secondary waters are blended in existing pipelines and ponds, mixing Santaquin Creek water, well water, spring overflow water, culinary and irrigation well waters with surface waters, and treated sewage effluent. Numerous backflow preventers assure that the secondary and culinary water never mix. The applicant would like to expand and improve its lawn and garden water system to free up culinary water for future growth and add pumping capacity to its secondary system, which can't serve the higher elevation areas or future development. Got a few pictures here. First in the map proposed here, you see these proposal is for on the east side of the I-15. That's where a majority of new houses are going at upper elevations. And the applicant would like to expand and improve its lawn and garden water system to free up culinary water for future growth and add pumping capacity to its secondary system, which can't serve the higher elevation areas or future development. They've spent considerable funds on installing a state-of-the-art secondary water system and treatment of sewage effluent to standards high enough to use it on the lawn and gardens currently. Currently, the sewage effluent is used on almost 20% of the outdoor water use. Sponsor is requesting from the board a project to construct a new booster pump station, and we'll call it a reservoir, about a 3.25 million gallon reservoir, to help provide adequate pressure and supply for the culinary and irrigation systems. The secondary irrigation tank will expand the secondary irrigation system. Should have been clear, the new booster pump station can supply booster pressure to both the culinary and secondary systems. They're going to share one building. We'll have separate pump stations on their own. There's a few pictures of their existing system. Here's a photograph, map of where they're proposing the pump station to go. Again, on the east side of the city, up on the hill. A new secondary water tank or reservoir will be up by one of their city culinary tanks. Oh, this is where the booster pump station is going to go. This is looking east. There's a couple of their storage tanks you can see. The tank in question they're going to be building up by is further up the hill. This is where the new storage secondary reservoir will be located. As you can see, it sits above overlooks the entire town. And this is their membrane bioreactor the city installed that they're getting treated effluent from. Plant costs about $18 million. Standing outside the plant, it has no odor. In fact, there's a subdivision about a block east of here. These folks didn't even know there was a treatment plant here because it doesn't put off any smell. Inside, this is just a typical cells for a bioreactor. These are the activated bugs digesting sewage. It's aerated. standard process here, but from here it goes into membranes, high pressurized membranes. State-of-the-art technology's come along a long way since the 90s, and this kind of plant is sort of what you'll be seeing in the future a lot of places. Again, Santaquin's kind of ahead of the game on this. Oh, the pump station proposed. We'll have 4 bays, 2 for culinary water, 2 for secondary water. In conjunction with the new secondary water tank, the project will give the ability to pump water to any place in the city from any source of water. Project benefits of the project are a larger portion of the city will be able to use secondary water for outdoor watering. Secondary tank will allow expansion of the secondary system. They'll be able to send any source of water to any part of the city. It'll give some redundancy on both the culinary and secondary systems in case of emergencies. There will be more treated effluent available to be used on lawns, and they would like to continue using this treated effluent for future growth. And more future growth can be accommodated. As shown in the cost estimate, the cost is estimated to be about $4,048,000. As shown, the board is being requested to fund 85% of this project, or $3,441,000. Staff recommends the board authorize and commit 85% of the project cost, up to $3,441,000, and the bonded indebtedness be returned at 2% interest over 20 years with annual payments of approximately $223,000. The financial feasibility shows the city would be above the board's affordability guideline with this project. And the city currently has fairly aggressive tiered culinary water rates, and the city is currently discussing putting tiered rates on the metered secondary water and lawn and garden system. And that is staff's report.
Thank you, Russell. Gentlemen, do you have a comment you would like to make on behalf of Santaquin City?
No, I think Russell has done a great job. We appreciate the board's consideration. Russell's been really good to work with, and we look forward to hopefully building a project that will help us to make better use of our resources. That's what we've been talking about here in this meeting, and Santaquin has done not any thing that I've done, but over good planning and good management and foresight has done a great job with trying to make very good use of water resources, and we like to continue to do so. So thank you for your consideration.
Mr. Mayor or Mr. City Manager?
I'd love to. Thank you for entertaining our project today. That WFR project, the water treatment plant, was a hard sell in Santaquin. The elected leaders went through a lot to get it done. It was a previous mayor and the council then, but we are so grateful for their efforts in doing that and being able to have this system that we have now and being able to use our treated effluent. We want to expand. The growth is coming south. Santaquin's seeing that growth, and we need to be prepared for it. And anyway, we thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Questions from the board? Yes, Norm.
Having been a city manager myself, I'm just a little curious as to what you think how it's going to be received if you do start charging on a tiered basis for your secondary water. How's that going to fly?
Well, any change is difficult, but I've actually had a discussion with Mark Christensen from Saratoga Springs just this morning about their tiered structure with regard to secondary irrigation. And the methodology that they used, which incorporated both permeable surfaces as well as the amount of water that the developers brought in for that area, allowed them to put a system together that was very defendable. And although it was a little bit hard to digest, the system that they did put in place made them the lowest secondary water user in the state last year. And so we think that having this type of an approach would be well received, mostly because our residents are already used to paying increased water rates based on increased consumption because we're one of the first metered systems in the state. And so we believe that we're very prudent in our use of the water that we have, and that our growth can be sustained because of the wise use of and the wise decisions made by our previous elected leaders and city staff. So we think we're right on track to where we've been in the past. That doesn't mean I'm not going to get beat up and have the target on my back.
I have a question. Mr. Hadley told us that this 3.25 million gallon reservoir is open top reservoir. Any potential for recreation aspect to that?
So we have another pond right now that serves part of our community that does have fishing and a recreation component to it. This plan was originally for an additional pond that would be stocked with fish and provide an amenity to our community. And there's some debate in the design. Should it be an open top tank, which would use less land and be a little bit easier to control and lower maintenance cost, or should this amenity be provided to that area of town through the creation of a pond? We're still in that evaluation phase on this component of the project, but our residents love the fact that we do have an urban fishery in our community.
But you are ready for committal of funds today? We are. So you are in a hurry?
We are, especially for the booster pump. The other component we are locking in right now, our designs and our land acquisitions.
The booster pump station is designed and even bid right now. They're ready to build the booster station after they do geotech design and decide on whether you want a fishing pond. I hadn't heard this. So maybe we should give them a better deal. I don't know. But, after other issues are taken care of with the pond, reservoir, tank, whatever we're going to put up there, they will be ready for committal of funds.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Farrell.
I'll make the motion. We go ahead and approve and commit 85% of the project cost up to $3,441,000, and that the bond indebtedness be returned at 2% interest over 20 years for an annual payment of approximately $223,000, including reserves.
All right, Mr. Farrell's made the motion. Mr. Stevens has seconded the motion. Any further discussion on the project? If not, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Welcome. Okay. While we're moving to the Lake Powell pipeline report, I'd like to recognize that Mr. Terry Warner from HDR is with us today. Angie McKinnon from HDR. Thane Clark from Bowen & Collins and Associates is with us today, and Mr. Mike Collins from Bowen & Collins. And, whoops, I missed one. Eldon Chestnut from Granite Construction. Appreciate you folks attending our board meeting today. And Joel will give us a report on the Lake Powell project.
Thank you. It's been an exciting last few months since we last discussed this at the beginning of December. We had an event that we'd been working towards for a long time. Over the last decade, preparing information and submitting to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, known as FERC, documentation to go in our license application, hoping that there'd come a point where they would say, all right, this application is accepted. And that happened on December 11th. And it was a much awaited for day, thousands of pages of documentation, reports, studies that went into that application. That notice that they issued was called the Ready for Environmental Analysis, and it indicated that they accepted the application. It also opened up a comment period for people to make motions to intervene, protest, offer comments, recommendations, terms and conditions. Opened a 60-day comment period. One item in that Ready for Environmental Analysis took us by surprise was that they indicated they hadn't yet decided if they were going to have jurisdiction over the entire hydro system, including the penstocks and the hydro stations themselves, or just the locations where the hydro stations were located. And we reviewed the documentation that communication we've had with them over the years, and concluded that they had indicated several times previously that they did intend to have jurisdiction over the hydro system, the downhill portion of the project. And so we prepared a petition for declaratory order on the jurisdiction. It was a fairly lengthy document because it included all the references of previous places where they had indicated they had jurisdiction over the project, and submitted that to them with a request that they make a jurisdictional determination and essentially halt the proceeding until that decision is made, partly because we didn't feel like it was fair to us as an applicant or to the other involved federal agencies to have that be up in the air, to not know whether or not they were going to have jurisdiction. So that was filed on December 27th. And on January 11th, FERC did issue a notice to suspend the proceeding, so that and indicated that the proceeding would be on hold until they make that decision. And at that point, when they make the decision, it would restart that 60-day comment period that I had referred to. And so right now we are in a little bit of a waiting game, looking to the next couple of FERC commission meetings when we would anticipate they would make a decision on that jurisdictional determination. In addition to our petition, there have been a couple of other letters filed. One went from the Utah congressional delegation, Senator Hatch and the others to FERC, encouraging them to continue with their previous with what they had previously indicated of having jurisdiction over the hydro system. And then BLM submitted a letter, I believe it was today or yesterday, also requesting that FERC make that determination. So aside from that, another item that we finally submitted the cultural resources report. It was due on January 5th, and that was submitted complete and on time to be part of the license application. That is a report that's not open to the public because it contains sensitive information about cultural sites. But that is an important part of the application, and that will be considered in the environmental impact statement. The last board meeting in December, the board authorized us as a division to enter into an MOU between the Bureau of Land Management and the Washington County Water Conservancy District to aid the BLM in preparing a resource management plan amendment. There was an area of the project that BLM would be doing, modifying their resource management plan, and needed participation from us and the district. So that MOU has been prepared and is just actually that MOU has been finalized. The two more items that I'll mention, we do intend to continue meeting with the Kaibab Band of the Paiute Tribe. Another meeting scheduled here actually this month to discuss the project with them further. Another item would be the negotiations with Reclamation, which are you going to touch on that, Eric? And we'll let Eric talk a little bit about that one. And the last item I'll mention is the project website is up and running now, lpputah.org. And that would contain a lot of helpful information, project updates, kind of current status, and then a timeline for anybody that's interested in looking at that, lpputah.org. And that's my report on Lake Powell Pipeline.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Any questions or comments for Joel?
Well, just a question, you, Joel, you indicated on the jurisdictional decision that they would make that within the next 2 meetings. Is that what type of time frame?
We requested that they make that determination by February 15th, and that, you know, like I said, that was in our letter December 27th, so at that time it was a couple of months. They do have a commission meeting on the 15th, and we're hoping that that may be something that's discussed there. They haven't, I've been checking as I've been sitting back there to see if they've released the agenda yet. It's supposed to come out today, so we can see whether we are on that agenda or not for the 15th, and don't know yet at this time, but we should be finding out soon if it'll be the 15th, and if not, I imagine it would be the March meeting that we would hope to be on there. Getting on the agenda is one step, and then finding out what the commission determines will be another matter. And so we're kind of a little bit of waiting game to find out, but that's the timeline we're looking at. We're hoping for next week.
Is that a regional? Correct terminology, not. Is that a regional meeting or a national?
It's a national meeting held in D.C.
Okay.
Yep, that would cover all the items that they have for nationally.
Any other questions? Thank you,
Thank
Joel,
you.
for your report. Our next agenda item is acceptance of a Flaming Gorge water right contracts.
Okay.
Mr. Millis.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, in October you directed staff to begin formal negotiations with Bureau of Reclamation regarding the Flaming Gorge water right, which it assigned to the board in 1996, and with the stipulation that the board enter into water service agreements with the Bureau of Reclamation. So we went through that negotiation process that was done in actually 4 meetings, three locations. We met in Vernal, we met in St. George, and we had 2 meetings here in Salt Lake. So the meeting in Vernal was regarding the Green River block contract. The meeting in St. George was regarding the Lake Powell Pipeline block contract, and then the meeting in Salt Lake covered both of those. There was actually 1 meeting for Flaming Gorge, or for Green River, and 1 for Lake Powell Pipeline. We had Galen Snow representing the Green River water users. We had Ron Thompson representing Lake Powell Pipeline interests sitting at the negotiation table with us. This was the conclusion of about 3 years of technical discussions with the Bureau of Reclamation and trying to come to an agreement. We were pleased at the results of the negotiation, as were Gawain and Ron representing the water users. The Bureau of Reclamation was also pleased with this. Just an interesting note that if the state had entered into contracts to just outright buy the water from Reclamation, it would have cost $92 per acre foot. As it was, given the type of agreement that we're doing, exchanging our direct flow rights for water stored in Flaming Gorge, there is a benefit to both Reclamation and the state of Utah. And with that, those benefits in mind, the total price that was worked out per acre foot for the Green River block was under $24, and the amount that was worked out for Lake Powell was under $25 per acre foot. And so the water users were pleased, Bureau of Reclamation was pleased, we were pleased with that. There are a number of other items that relate to the contract, the escalation rates, all of which we think we were able to come up with very fair and very good terms on. Rick Gold, who was the Upper Colorado River Regional Director for quite some time, was our consultant, was very helpful to us in being able to negotiate these contracts. And so with that explanation, we would be now at the point of waiting for the environmental work on both contracts to be completed. Environmental work specifically on this Green River Block contract, and then the NEPA work for the Lake Powell pipeline project itself. When those items are done, then the contracts will be ready to sign. We will have a memorandum of agreement between the state and Reclamation stating that we have come to agreed language if the board accepts this language, and with that would then wait until that NEPA work is done and sign the contracts and go forward from there. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, our recommendation is that the board accept these two contracts as they have been negotiated by the state and Reclamation.
Thank you, Director Millis. Any questions from the board for Director Millis on the acceptance of the Flaming Gorge water right contracts? If not, it would be appropriate that we have two motions for the acceptance of the two separate Flaming Gorge water right contracts.
Mr. Chairman, I would make a motion that the board accept the Flaming Gorge water rights contracts upon their completion and authorize the Division Water Resources Director to sign those agreements, the first one being the Green River Agreement, and then the second one being the Lake Powell Pipeline Agreement. I believe those need to be separate motions.
Yes. We'll take your motion.
Take Green River first.
In consideration, is there a second to Norm's motion? Jim Lemon will second the motion for the Green River segment of the Flaming Gorge water right contract. Any discussion from the board? If not, all in favor of accepting the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
I would make a similar motion, Mr. Chairman, that we also accept the Lake Powell Pipeline Agreement, authorize the division chairman to sign that agreement also.
Right, is there a second to the second motion?
Should be director rather than chairman, right?
Director, I'm
Yes.
sorry, yes.
Director. Correction to the motion, is there a second to the motion?
I'll second it.
Blaine Ibsen seconds the motion. Any further discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed to the motion? Motion carries. Thank you, Director Millis.
Thank you.
We will now move to agenda item number 9, the Director's report. Director Millis, we'll turn the time to you again.
Okay. Thank you. So Joel noted the things that have gone on with Lake Powell Pipeline. Todd and our consultants talked to you about the things that have gone on with third-party review and the water data. I would just add just a little bit to some of those things. We think that the legislative session is going well for us. We don't have many bills that we are following, concerned about, some that we have been working with the legislative sponsors on. In our budget hearings, things have gone very well. Base budget for the division has been accepted. with no cuts. We were concerned that there were some discussions about cuts. We don't believe that those are going to happen. We did have a second meeting with the Natural Resources, Agriculture, and Environmental Appropriations Subcommittee regarding the dam safety building block that we've talked with you about, $8.4 million to be used cooperatively with the NRCS money, which would be 65% of the cost of each of these dams that are being proposed to be worked on. There are 10 of them. It is a great opportunity for the state not only to bring in that money, which otherwise this board would have paid 80% of the costs of these dams. With this money coming in, board will only be paying 31.5%. And so we look at that as a great opportunity. I think the legislative committee has looked at that also that way. Regarding the legislative auditor's audit of the water data, the legislative auditors also made a presentation at the committee meeting and talked about the good efforts that have been made not only by the water suppliers but also by the Division of Water Rights, the Division of Drinking Water, the Division of Water Resources, and we've had a lot of help from other groups, including Rural Water Association of Utah, the League of Cities and Towns, and others, and the Legislative Auditor's Office has been very helpful in this process. They noted that the data is improving, as you saw today, and that there are a number of things still in progress that will make things better. And so we continue to work and try to implement the recommendations that have been made. And so we are we're happy, we're pleased with the recognition, we're pleased actually with the effort that has been made and the buy-in by the water suppliers to help get this data. The data is not just for us, it's very important for them in their planning and in their operations. And so, and then one final thing, you know, I'm watching the Colorado River and it's dry also. Some of these years in the past that it was dry here, but Wyoming and Colorado were quite wet is not the case this year. The southern part, that southwest corner of Wyoming, is doing better than any place else in the basin, but it's just a very small area of the state. The jet stream appears to be just blowing right up through Montana and then down into Nebraska, it looks like, and so it's really missing Colorado also. And so Troy noted the extremely wet spring that we had a few years ago, the Miracle May. We'd like to see one of those again, given the situation that we're in. Lake Powell has continued to inch upward with the good years that we've had. It's sitting at about 3,618 feet right now, which is 82 feet from full, which puts it about 56% full. Considering the long drought that we've had, it's performing very well, and we're just pleased that we've got the great reservoir storage throughout the state that will help us get through this dry year. Those that don't have reservoir storage, as Troy noted, are going to be in trouble, because it looks like, especially in the southern part of the state, Norm, that the stream flows are going to be pretty minimal. So with that, unless there's any questions, that's my report.
Any questions for the director?
Eric, I did have a question on the $8.4 million. Does that, with the matching money, that if it were to be used with the matching money that comes from NRCS, does that, will that meet that match component? And so all, you said 10 reservoirs or something would? 10
reservoirs. A lot of these are debris basins, but still very important. You'll remember the one in Ivans that failed about 5 or 6 years ago, and so it's very important to keep them up. So with the $8.4 million coming in, There will be about $17 million coming in from NRCS specifically to meet that cost match. But the NRCS is also paying for the engineering. They're also paying for some extra work that's not necessarily dam safety related. And so that all adds up to about $10 million more. So you've got about $27 million coming in from NRCS, about $950,000 from the local entities, and then the $8.4 million that would come through legislature to water resources, then to those projects.
Thank you for that clarification.
Clarification on that too. Is that just for those 10 debris basin type things, or is that for additional, like in our areas, if we have additional ones that want to get some?
That's for just those 10 in the 2019-2020 time frame. I assume there will be more that will will catch the NRCS's attention. I'll say, let's do these two. They've been very good to be able to go out and get the funds for those. But if you've got one that you're interested in, visit with the NRCS and let them know that you're interested in that. Having this money also frees up the regular $3.8 million that we've got each year to make sure that we're meeting those other high priority ones that dam safety has on their list.
Any other questions for the director? If not, I would just say amen to what Kyle and Blaine have said and compliment the division and the director for working hard to take full advantage of matching federal funds to help the residents of the state of Utah and in dam safety specifically in this case. So, anything else, Mr. Director? We have a slideshow or anything today?
Sorry,
or?
yes. How could I have forgot that? So we do have a slideshow today. Tom is going to show us what work was done at Tibble Fork,
which is, I don't know if it was meant to be that way, but Derek just talked about the NRCS match. That's one of the dams that was upgraded with the original $11 million. See if I can work it better this time. So how much time do I have? This is like the dessert of the meeting, so you can have as much or as little as you want.
Oh, we like a lot of dessert.
I've got
not
60
too much.
slides.
I need to hit the road soon.
Yeah, maybe not 60.
All right, so we'll be talking about the Tibble Fork Dam safety upgrade today. The project was started in 2016 and completed in the spring of 2017. It was to raise the dam crest by 13.5 to 15 feet, which would increase the design storage capacity from 160 to 380 acre feet. And I should mention that a lot of that original capacity had been lost due to sedimentation, and that was part of the purpose of the dam in the first place, to not only control the flood events, but to catch the sediment before it gets down too far on the American Fork River. Another aspect was to construct a downstream stability berm, because the foundation materials really weren't that good. Being as it was a flood debris control basin, it wasn't built with any cutoff between the dam and the foundation, so there was a lot of seepage. We had to remove the old spillway and replace it with a larger one, install a new outlet, install a cutoff wall and grout curtain, and that would cut off the seepage underneath the dam. Install chimney, blanket, and tow drains, reroute the summer home access road that used to run right across the crest, and construct some additional recreational features. So the total project cost, this is just the construction cost sharing, was just about $8.3 million. The NRCS put in 65% of that, plus the 100% of the engineering, like Eric mentioned. We put in 1.85, almost 1.851 million, and that was just for the dam safety features. It didn't include costs for any of the recreation, didn't include any of the costs of raising the crest, because we could only pay for the minimum standard upgrade on the existing facility. So we ended up only paying about 22% of that total construction cost. And although it wasn't available, the district did not utilize any of our loan funding for the project for their cost share. This is just a sheet from RB&G's design plan set. RB&G was the design engineer. Whitaker Construction out of Brigham City was the contractor. So if you look closely, the dotted line, dashed line was the original embankment and ground surface. So and this hashed line is what they left. They cleared and grubbed the upstream face and took some off the downstream, excavated down here, so it would be actually below the ground level, so it would catch any seepage that would come underneath. They installed a bentonite cement cutoff wall, so to once again stop the seepage, because all the embankment dams actually they leak. So all these safety measures were added. The crest was raised up to this elevation. The stability berm would be this right here, and the access road to the summer homes would be put on top of that stability berm. If you have any questions as I go along, just go ahead and pipe up. So this is a shot of the pre-project dam. The dam itself is just right there with the road running across the crest. The spillway was here. And you can see some of the recreational features. They had a parking lot, and this is a very popular recreation area. This is the post-project photo. So the original dam has been raised. So here's the original dam with a dog leg added, so that's the extra 15 feet. The spillway was relocated and enlarged, so it runs along here into a plunge pool. The outlet structure was moved. Originally, both the spillway and the outlet ran probably right along there, and now they're over here. This area was used as a source material for some of the dam, as well as this area up here and an area up here that's out of the photo. So this is a shot of the original spillway. You can see they've already done some clearing and grubbing at the toe, and you can see it's a HDPE pipe that they fused together to hook onto the end of the spillway to control the flow while they did the work. First thing they had to do was put in dewatering wells so they could dry up the area so they could excavate down at the toe of the dam. So there's one of the drill rigs. They've already started clearing off the left abutment where they will put in the grout curtain. This is that area north of the reservoir where they stockpiled and mined some of their material for the embankment. You can see in the background the dam. They've cleared the upstream face off. This is downstream. The first thing after they got it dewatered, they excavated this part out, put in the toe drain, which would run along the toe of, this is the toe of the new embankment. And at this point, they actually had to extend the old outlet out so they could pass the flows. And this is where that HDPE pipe was connected. And they've excavated this out, put down the blanket drain in this area. So there's a layer of filter sand and then drain gravel on top of that. So the filter would stop any material from flowing through that, but the water could pass through into the drain. They've dug out little trenches in this part. This is what they'd be excavating next, but they dug trenches out so it would dewater faster. This is just a shot. This is where the old spillway was. It's been all torn out. They're taking out the rest of the spillway structure here. And this is upstream. This was the original control tower. So the gate would be down here. The inlet was in screens around the structure. And this, what looks like the road, that's the pad for the cutoff trench where they'll run the machinery. And in the background here, you can see the long-armed excavator that they had to do that work. This shot shows downstream. This is the tow. They've excavated everything out. This is the blanket drain there running up the hill. This is, they're starting to install or place embankment material. And you can see that they've started work on the new spillway. They've poured a few sections and they're working on the rebar on that. So this is a closer up shot of that long-armed excavator. They have the ability to dig about 90 feet down. And so this was about as deep as they could get at the maximum section where the ancient stream flowed through. So at the abutments, it wasn't that deep, but then it dropped down to that maximum section and came up again. And they were continuously pumping this slurry in to hold the trench open. It's had Portland cement, bentonite clay, and I believe they threw in some potash. And it's like a thick milkshake. And if we can get this to work, here's a video of someone fishing.
You didn't want to talk about fish at that time, did you?
No. Apparently something happened to kill a fish in the stream, but we won't get into that. Okay. So what he's throwing in a weight, and so you can measure the depth of the trench at that point. And it was probably only 30 to 40 feet deep at that point. They had passed the maximum point. You can see all the teeth on the back of the bucket, because if they ran into something hard, they had to just work their way through it. And they did find some boulders and things they had to work through. I don't think there's much left on that video. So this is the end of the trench where they started. You can see the excavator in the background, but it's already starting to set up. And they actually went in after it mostly set up and put in kind of a harder cap on it. It wasn't pure concrete, but it was harder than this. And then once they got the cutoff trench going, they needed to work on the grout curtain in the left abutment. So the left abutment was in bedrock, but it was pretty fractured, so they had to go in and bring a drill rig in, drill the holes and grout those holes in. They had to haul all this material in for just an access ramp so they could get the drill rig up there. And when it was wet, it was really hard to walk up that ramp. You can see there's not a flat place. They had drilled the holes up here, and then they would move down, but it was on a pretty steep slope, and it's just a little close-up shot of there's not a big work area there. Here's another shot with the spillway. They're progressing. You can look at the size of the people there and the height of the wall, and you can kind of judge the magnitude of the spillway there. This is the embankment fill. So that's the embankment fill with the chimney drain that's running up the slope. It's just a shot of probably the week later. When they first started putting this in, they were just using front end loaders to bring in the materials and dump it in. But then they brought this. They call the company's a rock chucker, and you have the hopper here. You put the sand or the gravel in, and the conveyor system that they can put it in place, and it's pretty slick there. The toe drain was made out of the slotted HDPE pipe. So here's a picture of them fusing the pipe together. There's the drain that runs along the toe up the downstream groins, and then they put in drains along both sides of the spillway and put in a cross drain wherever there was a construction joint in the spillway. There's more work on the spillway, and the weather is getting cooler. You can see the leaves are turning, so they have to keep the concrete covered as it cures, and keep the ground ahead of it covered so it doesn't freeze. Just another shot. This is the new spillway. It was steel pipe wrapped. This little tent was, they kept the area covered where they were welding to keep it out of the weather. And the outlet discharges into the new spillway, so that's where that enters the spillway structure. Here it is. They finished the rebar for the concrete encasement for the spillway, and they putting up the forms for that. It's just a shot of the downstream. I don't know if I probably didn't point out on the plans, the chimney drain followed the slope of the old embankment, but then had to leave it, and it went vertical. So this is a shot where the chimney drain is going vertical, and there's the embankment fill between it and the old embankment. They kind of used this jig after they got going. They could put the drain material or the filter material on this side, the drain material on that side, and just drag it along, and it would place the drain material. Just a picture of it actually in use. It's up there. They have the front end loader to fill it. They have the track hoe to drag it along. So this is the dog leg portion, and this is the main dam portion. The spillway, and this is you can see how tight quarters they had to put in compacted fill in the drain along the hill there also. Here you have the dissipation blocks down at the bottom of the spillway. At one point where the stability berm crosses the embankment, they had to enclose the spillway, so it's box culvert from there up to the top of the dam. It's just a shot. This is the end of the spillway, the chimney drain. The dog leg is pretty much up to grade. This is when they did the outlet in two parts. The one part went up to that temporary ramp up for the for the drill rig. That was the first part. Then this was the extension after they took that access ramp out, and they're placing the concrete in the outlet enclosure that day. And once again, they're keeping the ground covered so it doesn't freeze, because they did get some cold weather there. There's snow.
What's that white stuff?
Haven't seen much of that this year. And so they have this tended. They're underneath there. They're tying the rebar for the spillway slab floor, and they need to keep it warm. So it was a nice toasty place to hang out on the cold day. Here's the new inlet structure to the outlet pipe with the air vent. They had hydraulic controls, so dam safety wouldn't let them put the bottom face of the spillway in until they had raised the embankment up, in case they needed to pass a flood event. It would go through the spillway and not over the embankment. There's just the outlet in the background. So here's the outlet. You can see the screens at the bottom. They have screens at the top. Then they put in the rebar there, and they're bringing up the embankment on the spillway structure. So this is pretty much the dam is finished. You have the riprap on there. So here's a close-up here. You have the spillway with the front port on it, the inlet structure to the outlet, the control structure house, and the staff gauge that can watch the level of the reservoir, and the log boom to keep people out of the spillway. It's another shot of the finished dam. Part of the recreation facilities where they brought in beach sand. So they have a nice sandy beach. They're putting in a boat ramp. This is the access road to the cabins, the plunge pool and the spillway. So that's another shot of the spillway. Just a shot of the whole completed dam, the new dog leg, the main dam section, the spillway outlet is that area. So this one, everything was finished. This was actually August 5th, the middle of the week, about noon, after my family had done Timpanogos Cave. I drug them up there to see what I'd been doing. The crest, the sandy area, part of it was a floating dock, so they could have their paddle boards or boats, whatever they could dock up there. And there it is, people enjoying the beach, middle of the week, middle of the day. And I hear during the weekends it's a madhouse up there. So that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Tom. That was fascinating. Appreciate that very much.
Well, what kind of fill criteria does the Bureau impose on this new construction? Meaning, are they able to fill it right off, or do they can only fill it so far, so high, and then have to come back down? I know when we did Willard Bay, the new 2-foot raise up there, they were only allowed to come up, and fill it full on the new section for a certain number of days, and I think it's for 60 days or something like that. Then they have to lower it back down. Do they have the same thing? Do you remember the photo where the close-up of the spillway that was finished and everything? They had everything finished, but the fence around there. The water level then, a week later, it was spilling. So there was not really a fill order or restriction placed on that.
Push the accelerator all the way to the floor, huh?
They had water coming, and it is a flood basin, so I guess they had to use it.
Okay. Any other questions for Tom? Thanks, Tom. Oh, one question, one thing from Director Mellis.
Hey, I handed you the this year's Water for Utah, which explains the things that the board and the division do. We use this to in our presentation to the legislature, and then has the updated numbers from last fiscal year on your funding programs. So
Appreciate that resource, Eric. We'll study that as we move forward. Anything else to come before the board? If not, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, and I don't know if I don't dare use Steve's gavel because I might break it.
Go ahead and use it.
Meeting is adjourned.